The conversation was quite constructive, and I once again understood that President Biden is an experienced statesman.
If you were planning to completely stab Joe Biden in the back, you probably wouldn't set up the relationship in that way. And of course, as much as Putin wants to have some kind of relationship with the US president, his whole MO is to disrupt.
The highly anticipated meeting between President Joe Biden and President Vladimir Putin is over, and we're here to break it down. President Biden's strategy leading up to his first face-to-face meeting with his Russian counterpart is rooted in over 3 decades of foreign policy experience. This is not his first rodeo with Russia. The president has already met Putin during his time as vice president, and he was also involved in each of the most consequential arms treaties between Russia and the US during his time in the Senate as the head of the Foreign Relations Committee and then, of course, as vice president. Let's get into how things went this time around. And we have a very special guest here to help us do that. RYAN HEATH, our author of the Global Translations newsletter, which if you don't subscribe to it, you absolutely should. RYAN, thank you so much for joining us.
It's good to be the second RYAN on any.
Let's start with the top takeaways as you see them from the summit.
First and foremost, it wasn't like the disastrous 2018 press conference with Trump and Putin in Helsinki, Finland. So that in itself is a win for Biden. I reckon that both sides thought this ended up more amicable than maybe they were expecting going in. At the same time, Putin was spouting a bunch of false equivalencies, and they're not really eye to eye on any of the key issues.
Of course, the real analysis and conclusions won't come for months, maybe even years after this. Were there any moments, before the discussions started that stood out for you, RYAN?
Biden avoided some of the traps that Putin tends to set for other leaders, where he keeps them waiting, for example. Biden didn't have that happen to him. And for Joe Biden, he had to prove that he was being tough. He couldn't just go in and roll over or take Putin at face value in anything that he said. It's not about trusting Putin, and he's always been a skeptic of Putin. It's about identifying the self-interest and then going away and verifying the self-interest. And he says that he's done that on a number of areas, including on these cyber attacks that have been increasing in scale and increasing in number in recent months. Putin has denied that he's behind them. But Biden was able to lay out 16 areas where essentially he said, if you touch us in these areas, we're going to fight back. It's a 3-dimensional chess game when you're at a summit with someone as experienced as Vladimir Putin. Been 5 US presidents now while he's been Russian president. So, he can match Biden when it comes to that sort of heavy duty global experience.
When they finished up, there was, of course, no joint press conference. Do you think that was the right decision on Biden's part, having seen the 2 solo press conferences now?
Yeah, I think it was a smart decision. He had a lot more to lose than to gain by doing it jointly. The more you get images of the 2 of them sort of palling around on screen, and Biden is one of those affable guys. He's liable to put his hand on someone's shoulder. He's liable to joke around because that's what he considers good human-spirited behavior. That very quickly becomes a GOP attack ad if you do it the wrong way. Putin is not above humiliating other people, and we didn't know sort of how respectful he'd be before the meeting began. So to commit to that joint press conference like Donald Trump did, that would have been a real risk. And I just think he played it safe, and overall the bet paid off.
The emphasis was very different from the 2 of them. We didn't hear Putin talk much about human rights. What do you see as Putin's press strategy here in the way that he presented the meeting to the world?
I think he wanted to say, look, we were 2 reasonable men having a reasonable discussion, and we didn't get along on everything, but we were mature about it. Obviously, there's a lot of people who have the impression that he's a murdering dictator who is the permanent enemy of the United States. So anything he can do to convey the opposite of that is going to suit his interests. And he did that pretty well for half of the press conference. And then he went a bit off the rails, where he compared Alexei Navalny, the jailed opposition leader who's was poisoned by Russian agents of Vladimir Putin's. He compared him breaking the law to what was happening at the Capitol on January 6th. And obviously that's a bit ridiculous.
Let's talk about the Biden solo press conference.
How could I be the President of the United States of America and not speak out against the violation of human rights.
Do we think that's really what happened behind closed doors, or was that just a part of their meeting, but that's the part he wants to emphasize to the world?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. It obviously came up, but the fact that the meeting didn't go for 5 hours means that not every single situation was addressed in detail, let alone solved. So of course that's going to be their spin. But he kind of was projecting a little bit of the sort of chest out tough man at the beginning, because I think that's what the strategy was. So even if that's not what happened in the room, they were pretty disciplined in sticking to that pre-agreed strategy of saying, I came here to lay down red lines, I achieved it, and we're going to move on in this kind of skeptical but stable sort of manner in the future.
After a pretty flawless week in Europe with a number of summits, at the very end, the last question, as Joe Biden is leaving the press conference, he gets a question from CNN's KAITLAN Collins that seems to really set him off.
Why are you so confident he'll change his behavior, Mr. President?
Yeah, I'm not confident in changing behavior. What do you do all the time?
So
when did I say I was confident?
You said in the next 6 months you'll be able to determine.
What I said was, let's get it straight. I said what will change their behavior is that the rest of the world reacts to them and it diminishes their standing in the world. I'm not confident of anything. I'm just stating the fact.
But given his past behavior has not changed, and in that press conference, after sitting down with you for several hours, he denied any involvement in cyber attacks. He downplayed human rights abuses. He even refused to say Alexei Navalny's name. So how does that account to a constructive meeting as President Putin?
If you don't understand that, you're in your own business.
If you've covered Biden for a while, you know he has this side to him. He does have a short temper, and occasionally we saw this with the press on the campaign trail. Kind of rare, but like when you see it, you're almost shocked because it goes from avuncular Joe Biden to, get off my lawn Joe Biden.
It just must have been one of those moments where the advisors see everything in slow motion and they can see Biden is just inches away from the door where he's cleared for safety and like nothing going wrong. I think it's typical of the administration being slightly defensive as well, where they kind of see journalists' jobs sometime as just sort of pointing out how much better they are than Donald Trump. And KAITLAN Collins is kind of making the point or exposing the point that Joe Biden can have the same flip outs that Donald Trump did against journalists. So I think that was quite a moment of weakness for Biden and might explain why he was doing a bit of groveling on his way to the airport.
And I feel good about it. I feel, one of the things that I think understandably there was a good deal of skepticism about would the G7 sign on and give America back its sort of leadership role. I think it did. It wasn't me, but they're glad America's back.
Usually Joe Biden does not take questions from the traveling press pool as he's about to get on an airplane, especially after a long, arduous trip like this one.
And just strategically, Biden needs to frame Putin as the adversary, not American journalists. So that was the real course correction that he had to lock down before it was wheels up on the plane.